Karat Rider, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2017 dark fantasy romantic drama titled The Shape of Water. Now, The Shape of Water also seems to have a little bit of a mixed blend of monster movie madness that goes along with the romance and the fantasy elements. The length of this movie is 2 hours and 3 minutes long. It is directed by Guillermo Del Toro. It is produced by Guillermo Del Toro and J. Miles Dale. The script was also done by Guillermo Del Toro and Vanessa Taylor. The story was also done by Guillermo Del Toro. The score was done by Alexandre Desplat. The cinematography by Dan Laustsen. And it was edited by Sidney Wolinski. And the stars of the movie are Sally Hawkins. We also have Michael Shannon, Richard Jenkins, Doug Jones, Michael Stuhlberg, Octavia Spencer, Nick Searcy, David Hewlett, Nigel Bennett, Lauren Lee Smith, Martin Roach, sorry about that, John Capellos, Morgan Kelly, and Wendy Lyon. So the story goes a little something like this. Set in the year 1962, The Shape of Water is about a mute lady named Eliza Esposito, played by Sally Hawkins, who works as a cleaning lady at a top-secret laboratory run by the government in Washington, D.C. Feeling that her life will never change for the better, she, along with her colleague Zelda Fuller, played by Octavia Spencer, find a horrendous-looking amphibious humanoid held in captivity by the government authorities who want to dissect the creature, but Eliza begins to befriend the creature and makes it her mission to set it free. But of course, this is not only just, she's not only just, she's not only just, trying to make it her mission to save the creature from getting dissected and being physically and verbally abused by these top-notch scientists who are working in the labs, because they're obviously dissecting this creature. They also seem to discipline it in some of the most cruelest, barbaric fashions by using cattle prod when it misbehaves. They do all kinds of other torturous protocols. I don't know if they do it out of pleasure, but of course, obviously, the superiors who work there are the ones who give the direct orders, and even if by any chance means are necessary that they should inflict physical harm to this amphibious humanoid hybrid, so be it. But obviously Eliza doesn't want these guys to be doing all these horrific, cruel mistreatments to this creature, who's like it's like sort of like either some kind of amphibious or probably maybe reptilian creature who spends most of its time in the water. It's more adapted to aquatic life than compared to the more land life that we humans are more accustomed to. But for what it seems, it's very, very high in intensity, this movie. If you're into romantic tales, this is good. If you're also into monster movies, well, this one has a little bit of some monster movie madness going into it, even though it's not necessarily a horror film. In fact, it isn't a horror film. Yes, once again, we take a classic monster character from the golden years in Hollywood, and we decided to romanticize it, much like what they did to the vampire lore from the Twilight movies. Yes, they took vampires and made them into emo type manifestations where instead of melting in the sun, they sparkle. Once again, we take another movie creature, and instead of making the monster into a villain, we make the monster more as a misfortunate victim. Uh, yeah. So, under the direction from director Guillermo Del Toro, who pretty much obvious has his handprints all over this, as he also directed, produced, wrote the script, wrote the story. So this is definitely a Guillermo del Toro pet project. We see a rare fantasy story that's not set in the mystical lands of some exaggerated place beyond our imagination, but set in our world just decades past. In a statement, Del Toro said that this movie was one he felt very satisfied in making. And don't just take his words though, this movie received a plethora of awards, including 4 Oscar wins. Who knew that a monster movie has a place in the realms of the Academy Awards? Back then, it was only just used as B-movie type things, escapist fun. Now all of a sudden, monster movies are now Academy Award caliber. Who knew? But it's not particularly like the villain, it's the victim. I will get more onto like who the real villains in the story is. Obviously inspired by the classic monster movies, and in this case, the creature from the Black Lagoon from 1954, Del Toro had British actress Sally Hawkins in mind for the role of Eliza, and Hawkins surely did not disappoint. Even though she doesn't have a speaking part per se, she's playing a mute who utilizes sign language to get her message across, and her body language also seems to take more seem to exceed more in terms of dialogue. We can assure you that she definitely does not disappoint. She is just picture perfect in this role. Even though she plays a mute, she can still find ways to see the inner beauty of this creature who is subliminally brought to life by actor Doug Jones. And like I said, even the monster himself is not some one-dimensional creature who's just in it for jump scares or frights. This freak of nature, I know it kind of hurts me to actually refer to him as a freak of nature, but he actually brings many dimensions to this amphibious creature, or this humanoid amphibious creature. He brings, a lot of emotions, and we actually, believe it or not, sympathize with the creature of what he's going through. I mean, just because a certain manifestation seems to be a formation of something that's beyond our expectations doesn't necessarily mean you have to still toil with it. Just let it live. You don't have to take it into captivity, have it dissected, have it cattle prodded, or anything like that. Sure, and maybe it also tells you about the lessons that it's not appropriate to go into the category of exploitation. So therefore, there's a lot of lessons to be lived about this. And one of the things that I liked about Doug Jones's performance here is that also, just like Sally Hawkins' character Eliza, he doesn't utilize acting through use of dialogue, but definitely his body language and his emotions speak volumes. We can see when he's sad. We can see when he is happy. We can see when he's in love. I mean, this movie could have easily been passed off like one of those old school, silent film stuff, because the two main characters, Eliza and the amphibious creature, well, they don't say anything, really. But they just let their body language do all the talking. And, even though we take pity and sympathy for the creature, you still also have to take into consideration that he could still sort of project monster-type qualities as well. I mean, when he's angry, you probably would be best if you just left the room, because yes, he could still depend on primal instincts when provoked and when pissed off. So, the old take caution with the wind, folks, is quite the necessity when dealing with such a manifestation like the amphibious creature. The film definitely allows us to see some similarities between this and other fairy tales about princesses getting romantically linked with creatures that are not particularly human. Think of The Princess and the Frog. Think of Beauty and the Beast. Since I'm talking about fairy tales, I have to sort of go with the rule of three. We already said The Princess and the Frog. We already mentioned the Beauty and the Beast. What other movies or what other fairy tales has princesses being romantically linked with someone who's not of the human persuasion? Little Red Riding Hood? You never know. What makes you think that a wolf and Red Riding Hood are particularly arch enemies? There might even be some romantic links between Red Riding Hood and the wolf. It's possible. But I digress. That's just me being silly. Although Eliza is not blessed with royalty because, even though she's working at a top-notch laboratory in Washington, D.C., she is not a scientist, she is not a researcher, she's not even a receptionist. She's just a cleaning lady. That's right. She has to be the one responsible for picking up whatever disgusting things the staff does. She picks up shit while the scientists treat her like shit. May as well, I guess, to pick up shit, you might as well be treated like shit. Okay.
Be careful what you say on that.
And the creature, and don't worry, this is not like the stereotypical fairy tale story about non-human characters transforming into princes. We can guarantee you that the creature is not gonna transform into a white knight galloping away on a white steed. No. Fuck that. But Del Toro doesn't give a shit about that. He wants us to see how love should never be judged by its cover. No matter how you look, love is for everyone. No matter how you look or how you act.
Spam? You want to dance or spam? Go ahead.
Now, aside from Sally Hawkins and Doug Jones,
It's spam.
they are joined by an eclectic, diverse range of interesting characters, both good and evil. We have Spencer, who provides much needed comic relief as the only other friend of Eliza, who acts as her sign language translator. And she's also a fellow cleaner, too. Oh, don't worry, she also gets treated like the vial that they pick up in the labs as well. Because when you're a janitor or a cleaner, they do you're practically the bottom of the barrel, and you're treated that way too. We also have Michael Stuhlberg. He plays the role of Dmitry Mozenkov, who's going incognito as Dr. Robert Hofstetter, who's actually a Russian spy, secretly posing as a scientist to get enough information on the creature. Eliza's other friend is a fellow neighbor who's a graphics artist who goes by the name of Richard Jenkins. He is her insecure neighbor, a tenant in her apartment, who works as an advertising artist, and he also has a thing for pie, particularly key lime pie. Oh yeah, he likes to go to his favorite pie shop for some key lime pie. But pie is not the only thing he's fascinated with. He's also somewhat at lust with the pie guy. If you know what I'm talking about. Because when you think about the 1960s, back in the 60s, homosexuality was quite taboo at the time. But he also had struggles to conceal his love for the pie guy. But it all works very, very effectively, and I gotta admit, Richard Jenkins turns in quite the strong supporting role here there too. So aside from some great performances from Sally Hawkins and Doug Jones as the principal two characters, we have Octavia Spencer once again shines in another supporting performance. Will she ever get a lead role? Or does she always just seems to be at her comfort zone playing supporting sidekicks to the protagonists? Maybe that's her comfort zone. Who am I to judge? Richard Jenkins, such a horribly underrated actor, also gets some deserved credit here. I think they also had some Oscar and Golden Globe nominations for their respective performances. If not, they should have. But aside from them, the real standout performance comes from Michael Shannon as the tyrannical leader of the operation, Colonel Richard Strickland. He was the real villain in this story. By God, he was ruthless. He was cunning. And his mission is to keep this creature in isolation to make sure he's well disciplined. And disciplined is what he does to this creature. By God, the things that he does to this creature, I would never do to my worst enemy. I tell you. I mean, he will, he uses all kinds of forces, like cattle prods, and shock treatment. And of course, he wants to dissect this creature because it will give him power. I mean, when you think about it, it's like another one of those monster or the man behind the monster type of thing that makes you question who the real villain is. In this case, it's definitely the man behind the monster that is the real villain in the story. He could be almost like a similar thing to like Victor Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein himself, or the monster. Who's the real monster? It's the man behind the monster. And here, Richard Strickland clearly indicates that in his actions, his demeanors, and his characters. But there's also, he could have probably would have been just passed off as a one-note villain, but we also get a little bit of his backstory too. And there are also parts of you that actually takes a little bit of sympathy. Now, because not only in his mentality that he's fragile and weak, I also discovered that his physical demeanor also seems to come across as being fragile and weak. That you gotta take a little tad bit of sympathy for him. I mean, there are many scenes about him that are quite disturbing. Like, if you ever look at his hands, sometimes you look at his fingers and they're black like a moldy banana. And, it's a little frightening and a little disturbing to see. And, even in spite of the fact of him being a villain, he also seems to come from a rather conservative lifestyle. I mean, outside of his work, you get to actually see that he's, I guess, a decent father. He's got a wife, he's got kids, he lives in a nice middle upper class home. And he seems like a loving, devoting, caring guy. But once he gets to work, once he puts his home life aside and his work aside, he takes a complete 180. And that's kind of, scary enough as it is. But at least, they give him dimension. He could have been just a one-note, flat-out, evil, tyrannical villain with no sub-stories towards him. We also get to see the origin as to why his hands are so disfigured and so disturbing looking. So even though he's a villain that we're programmed to hate and despise, there's still a part of us that's kind of somewhat you feel a little bit of remorse. I don't really like to rub politics in my movie reviews, but unfortunately, I have to. I'm kind of left with very little choice. It's another one of these movies where, once again, liberal-based Hollywood still continues to, and I guess they always seem to had a negative point of view with conservative lifestyles. Now, I'm not a conservative per se. I'm kind of moderate in both aspects. I really want to try to be as neutral and non-judgmental as possible, but once again, the movie takes a rather conservative-minded individual and clearly makes that person into a flat-out villain. Now, mind you, I don't condone any of his actions. He is a cruel, vicious, tyrannical individual who may not deserve our sympathy too much, but at the same time, there's just a little bit of me that makes me feel a little bit bad about this guy, about what he's going through, his illness, his physical frailties. and maybe I might probably take a little more sympathy towards his family than him, but still, just the shape that this guy's in is just a little over the top. Here.
Just a little, eh?
Michael Shannon definitely takes great depth to make us despise this character that seems to take the pleasure to hurt the creature and fear those around him. Except for his superiority. Then he acts like a total sycophant, brown-nosing goody-goody. But everybody below him, he'll treat you like shit. What could have been a one-dimensional villain character, Del Toro co-wrote the script along with Vanessa Taylor to give Strickland a backstory as to what caused him to be the way he is. So at least he's not like too cartoony. Just a bit. But at least there's some backstory. And I appreciate that. The narration for The Shape of Water is definitely backed up by Del Toro's color choices and has an impressive soundtrack by Alexandre Desplat. The visuals are definitely vibrant and stunning. Each scene has a similar visual vibe in some of the other films from the past, like Crimson Tide and Pan's Labyrinth. One of the main colors in this movie is green. Yes. You like green? I like green too. And it remains symbolic throughout the movie. Eliza's apparel to the key lime pie that Giles consumes, to the candy that Strickland eats, to the monster itself. In fact, green is the omnipresent color featured here, and any other colors just seem like an illusion. Look no further. Green plants. Definitely a big shout out goes to the cinematography from Dan Laustsen, whose impressive visuals showed that the film was equal in both style and substance. It's these visuals complemented by the brilliant story that make this movie very magical and enticing. Del Toro definitely once spoke out to the reporters that he was always curious about the real meaning of love. And after seeing The Shape of Water and creating the right characters in the right atmosphere, I firmly believe Del Toro answered his own questions both stunningly and visually. So with all that said and done, if I was to give this a scale out of 10, I think I would give The Shape of Water a 9. I mean, this is like one of those kind of rare occasions where you would take a monster movie, and whoever would have imagined that a monster movie would have its place in the Academy Awards. But there you go. It's not particularly a monster movie because, like I mentioned before, the monster is not the villain, but it's the people who work on the monster that are the villains. It's a great rescue mission type movie. It has the feelings of a fairy tale story without a princess and without the creature transforming himself into something spectacular. It just goes to show that love can come in many different shapes, sizes, and formations, and that no matter how a person looks or how a person acts, I think everybody deserves to be loved. This is a love story, top priority, and everything else just seems to be somewhat secondary. Like I said, this is definitely a pet project for Guillermo Del Toro. I thought he did a fine job, and we'll just leave it at that. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But I come in 3 simple ingredients: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments, because I wouldn't do that to you guys. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Correct Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.